As far as Russia as a military power goes, this has been a very sobering experience for the Russian military. What the Russians have achieved so far is to conquer about 2/3 of the Donbass region, which they say is the most important thing for them, and to establish this land bridge between the Donbass and Crimea, which was the territory that they conquered and annexed illegally in 2014. So they've taken about 20% of Ukrainian territory. But remember that this war began with Putin's intention to occupy the whole of Ukraine, to throw the government out, to install his own government, and effectively to absorb Ukraine into a greater Russia. That has completely failed. They are 2/3 of the way through occupying the Donbass, but elsewhere it's not going terribly well. And the Russians look as if they are going to be caught over the winter with all of their military objectives only partly achieved. President Putin has no military background. He was a regional KGB officer in Dresden, just one small city. That was his governmental role until, effectively, he became prime minister. Like all great dictators, he thinks that he's some sort of military genius. And in fact, I mean, what military decisions he has made, or we know that he has made, generally speaking, have proved to be disastrous. Again, like all dictators, people are frightened to tell him the truth. And he was not being told the truth, we think, by his military chiefs, Gerasimov, by his intelligence chiefs before the war began. And he seems to have had a very delusional grasp of what the situation in Ukraine really was. And as he has tried to, as it were, galvanize his military, it looks as if they've made the problem worse. Although they've got modern naval and air forces, their army is still relatively unreformed. And having gone into battle now for the first time since 1945, it's proved how poor it really is at conducting big operations. And so that's been an eye-opener, not just to those of us in the West who look at these things, but particularly to the Russian High Command, who thought that they were much better than they've turned out to be. The Russians have called in troops from every other theatre that they've been involved in order to send them to Ukraine. And so Russian forces opposite the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, are thinner now than they've been for many, many years. Russian borders are more open now than they've been for a very long time, because they've had to concentrate those competent and professional troops that they have into Ukraine. What the Russians are facing is a situation where if they get bogged down in Ukraine for the next few years, that their army is far, far too small to perform the various other jobs which a big power, a continental power like Russia, must have. Not least, they don't have many troops looking after the border with China, and believe me, that's a border that really worries them. If they're worried about an invasion of the homeland, they should look at the number of Chinese troops the other side of the Ussuri River. Ukraine is fighting for its life, so in principle Ukraine can hang on for a very long time. It's a big country, the biggest country in Europe apart from Russia itself, population of 44 million people. They say they can put 1 million people under arms, and that's plausible. They certainly think they can put 700,000 people, 750,000 or so, under arms by this time next year. That means that they've got plenty of ability to carry on and sustain themselves. But they can only sustain themselves and carry on fighting if the West carries on backing them with weapons and support and money. And that's the big if. If the West does not lose its nerve, and if the West is prepared to take some real pain from here on in to support Ukraine, then Ukraine can carry on at least as long as Russia can, and maybe longer. The present war, I think, may end in some sort of ceasefire, perhaps next year, perhaps the year afterwards. And so anything short of throwing this adventure out, preventing the Russians from gaining anything out of this adventure, anything short of that will be a victory for Putin. And for sure, if they gain even a little bit of territory from Ukraine this time round, they'll certainly be back for more quite soon. There is every chance that this will become an open-ended war, which will last for 50, 60, 70 years, which is to say it won't be a war all of that time, it will be a struggle in which Russia refuses to recognize the right of Ukraine to be an independent state, and Ukraine has to live with the reality that on their border is a state, a country 10 times bigger, which actually wants to conquer them. And so what I suspect will happen is that this struggle will go through a series of on-off conflicts. So there'll be a conflict, there'll be a ceasefire, the ceasefire will hold for a few years, then break down, the conflict will break out again. This is a struggle which will carry on in Europe, on and off, for 2 or 3 more generations. And we've got to prevail, we've got to protect ourselves, protect our liberties, and learn to prevail in this conflict so that Russia, whoever the leaders are in 20, 30, 40 years' time, get the message that Western Europe will stand up for its own democratic principles.